that somebody, in the pamphlet it says, somebody came up with a Bowie knife to take off Joseph's head, and that a flash of light protected Joseph's body.
And so we have this constructed canes that became very sacred to people and were believed to have healing properties. The coolest thing is what Heber C. Kimball suggests. I don't know anyone that's actually used it, but he says those that hold the canes can't be conquered by the devil.
And now, let us reason together.
Let's get into some martyrdom folklore, because David was telling me some theories that he's heard, and I was like, tell me more, because this is something that I don't know a whole lot about, outside of, the stuff that I've heard here and there, and from reading saints and stuff like that. But let's get into the folklore.
David, you want to get us started? What were the stories you were thinking about?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just get us started with, there's a court case, of course, as I mentioned, and the state of Illinois is prosecuting 6 people. They start out with a list of 60, I think, people that were supposedly involved in the murder. And then the jury decide that there's not enough evidence, so they cut the list down and they vote again, they cut the list down, they vote again, they cut the list down. They end up with 6 people, and the jury finally vote that, yes, these 6 people can be indicted. Then there's a series of witnesses that are called to the stand, and one of those is, by the way, little special mention here, the only witness that was let me say that the witness that was most helpful is somebody that is often forgotten to history, but Eliza Jane Graham, she was wonderful. She was in the Warsaw. So first up, imagine this courthouse that is completely packed with people armed to the teeth that are against Mormons. They all hate Mormons. There's the brink of civil war about to break out, like if anything, if the ruling doesn't go the right way and so forth. And in this super hostile environment, walks in Eliza Jane Graham. She worked at Warsaw House where the mob came after they killed Joseph that evening. And she heard them earlier in the day, and then she heard them later in the day, and she testified that they all told each other about how like, oh, I killed Joe Smith, oh, I killed Joe Smith, and that she gave all this great testimony, and she stood her ground even when the cross-examination, when they're trying to trip her up and discredit her. Unfortunately, in the end, the prosecutor that should have been on his side, kind of in his final testimony, he basically completely scuttled his case. He threw out her testimony. She's supposed to be on her side, but he threw out her testimony. He said, well, maybe she's been discredited. Maybe these other people have been discredited, but you know what? He kind of like whittled his case down to what he thought was maybe more important, or maybe he just gave up at that point. I don't know. But so that's extremely unfortunate, because she really went to great lengths to try to see justice happen in the face of great fear. But there's one other witness there. That was a long intro, but one other witness there that supposedly, his name is William Daniels. He was an out-of-towner that kind of showed up on the day that this all happened, and he kind of got roped into this thing. There's a whole story. Later on, he recounted this story to a typesetter who printed it and distributed pamphlets, and you can still get this booklet online today. It's called The Murder of the Generals Joseph Smith and Hiram, something like that, generic. Anyways, unfortunately, it seems like, if you read William Daniels' court testimony, even though that booklet seems to have come by him and was published by John Taylor, who I assume is the same John Taylor, it actually seems like the typesetter took huge liberties and basically kind of heard the story a few times by ear and then wrote it down, embellished it a bunch, and then published it to make a buck. And so unfortunately, we have a very embellished story there. And it's a little hard to pick out.
He was like, this isn't going to move copies at all. I got just the thing. Yeah.
So unfortunately, it's a little hard to pick out what was true and what was false. William Daniels, at least in his testimony, he was a bit cagey about, because he was in a hostile environment too. At this point, he'd converted to the church. Prior to then, he was just an out-of-towner, showed up, wasn't a member. Soon thereafter, converted to the church because of what he saw that I'm about to describe. But he was cagey about it. He was in a hostile environment, and he did give a few things. Like, they would say, did such and such happen? And he would say, no, that was an embellishment. Did this happen? And he would say, yes, but it didn't look like that. So one of the things that he said happened was that Joseph Smith, and he said this not only in the pamphlet, which we're not sure about the truth of, but in the court case, which seems more trustable, is that there was a light that protected Joseph's body. He said, so the pamphlet says that after Joseph was hanging in the window and fell down, they propped him up against the well, and then they formed a firing squad and to execute him, and that Joseph wasn't dead at this point. I'm not actually sure. There's conflicting testimonies, but this is what the pamphlet says. Then William Daniels says that after he was executed by firing squad there on the ground, that somebody, in the pamphlet it says somebody came up with a Bowie knife to take off Joseph's head. Okay, I should probably given a warning before this point, but this is pretty graphic here. Turns out in the testimony, he says it wasn't a Bowie knife, it was a flute, and it was somebody that was pretending to be Governor Boggs's son that was like he was, speaking as if he was Governor Boggs' son to try to, any witnesses there to try to show that it wasn't these Warsaw residents, it was actually out-of-towners that was doing this. But anyways, in the pamphlet, it talks about this guy coming up and that a flash of light protected Joseph's body. So that in the court case, the cross-examiner said, did this flash of light happen? And he said it did, but it wasn't quite like in the story. There's a painting or an imprint of the light. So there's just some interesting things here that if that did happen, it would be something that John Taylor and the others that were inside wouldn't have seen. And the only people that saw were the mob and maybe some Carthage grays that were hanging around. And so it would be something that they wouldn't have testified of, right? If it's a supernatural thing protected Joseph's body, they wouldn't have told that. And the only person that might have told about it was the person that was there that wasn't really supposed to be there. He was just kind of like, what's going on? And he went along with it. So that's interesting. On the other hand, there's the argument that maybe he was just trying to sell a book. But at this point, A, he doesn't seem like he was getting much money from this book. It was the typesetter. And B, at this point, he's in the court testimony phase. He's not trying to sell his book anymore. He's testifying to the people that are, anti-Mormons armed to the teeth that are like filling this courthouse. So I don't really know what justification he would have of continuing this idea that there was a flash of light that protected Joseph's body. And it also makes sense because I've often heard as a kid, in Sunday school, well, somebody yelled the Mormons are coming and then everyone took off. Well, it just seems a little odd. Like this angry group of people, why would they just, who would shout that first up
and then leave? Yeah.
Why would they just up and leave? But if there was something like supernatural that happened, then maybe that's why they left, I don't know. Chris, you've studied this as well. What are your thoughts?
There's the father of Latter-day Saint folklore is a guy named William A. Wilson, and he was an incredible man, and he would often say, just because something didn't happen doesn't mean it's not true. Meaning we need to look beyond just debunking things. We need to figure out what's going on in them. So I don't know if this really happened or not, but I know it meant a great deal to the early Latter-day Saints. And there's a key idea. They have to protect the body. So it is sacred to them. He's one day going to be resurrected. And so that God would protect his body would make a lot of sense to them, and it makes a lot of sense to me. Look at this. This is the image in 1845 that shows up in the pamphlet that David was talking about. And here we have the ruffian about to take the head of Joseph and the light coming down in the background. This story and this image, you can find like 7 different versions of different times people have painted this scene. The Council of 50 is going to meet the next year, and they're going to have an entry in the minute book that describes the martyrdom. It's a page and a half, and it includes this story right there, and an official thing relayed to everyone. I think it's right. John Taylor, Willard Richards didn't see it. They didn't talk about it. They're in a state of panic and pain if you're John Taylor. But is it possible? I certainly think so. B.H. Roberts in 1910-ish is the first one to question it. And he says, I doubt this is a true account. And so from that point, we've started removing it from church sources. But for me, this is the great sort of unproven stories of our people. And so I'm glad we're sharing it today. And yeah, there
That's
were
great.
lots of ideas that someone's going to harm
So you're saying
Joseph's
like
body.
by focusing on what's true about the story, the facts may not be true about that whole story, but what was true or what did ring true was the fact that there was a kind of a divine presence around the prophet Joseph Smith, and that they needed to uphold that divinity and they needed to hang on to that as long as and as hard as they could because they were about to be trekked out to the west.
And this, and most importantly, this is a sacred moment, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't seem, when you're getting murdered, it probably doesn't seem sacred. But the idea that God would have protected this body, and God really did protect the body. Somehow they're able to get an unmolested body back to Nauvoo for the saints in both cases. And so whether a light protected them or they were scared by a voice of people shouting, the Mormons are coming, whatever it was, somehow these bodies got back to Nauvoo and Joseph wasn't beheaded, which great scholar Joseph Johnston wrote a little about this. Others have as well. Sam Brown talking about the fate of the body. And they talk about how, there were corpses beheaded and beheadings that were really common.
Interesting. So that was actually uncommon. Joseph Smith's body being preserved was uncommon. Is that what you were saying?
I don't know that it was uncommon, but it's common for people to, once you're lynched,
it was such a controversial
to be mutilated.
Right.
I mean, this is just something you do when you lynch someone, you hate them. And so if you look at racial lynchings in the 1900s, I mean, regularly people are castrating and other forms of just defiling bodies after they kill them. And so that we would have thought that could have happened and that we were grateful for God to stand in the way of it makes a lot of sense.
That's fantastic. Well, awesome. Are there any other notable folklores around the martyrdom or the period right around the martyrdom that you think our audience might be interested in?
Yeah, I mean, this whole period is full of such great material. Often people want to talk about Joseph Smith and garments. Joseph wasn't wearing garments at the martyrdom. In the Nauvoo temple, we have a whole big conversation after the endowments given between the apostles. The apostles are actually lecturing, and they give different ideas of why Joseph and Hiram weren't wearing their garments. And ultimately, nowadays people like this story because they're like, well, maybe they weren't wearing garments because you weren't supposed to wear garments all the time. But that wasn't it. And so they gave different stories, right? Emma asked Joseph to take off the garment because it was so hot. Joseph and Hiram had ordered everyone to take off the garments leading up to this moment. And John Taylor was actually the one that refused. And the reason he asked them to take them off is because they didn't want to expose who the members of the inside holy order were, right? And so if you were going to be arrested, then they would see what you're wearing and it would reveal who you were within the community, and they could defile it. One of the things they say in the Nauvoo temple is, let's wear our garments, and if they blast us to death, let them blast apart the garment as well, right? And so wear this thing. So I'm interested in that. There's also a lot of conversation about the sacredness of Joseph's blood that plays into this. Are you guys familiar with the blood stain on Carthage Jail?
No.
David, you heard of this one?
No.
So Joseph's blood and Hiram's blood is on the floor of Carthage Jail, and it remains there quite some time. There's even a piece of glass that's put over it for a time at Carthage Jail when visitors come. But the claim is, this is something Latter-day Saints believed, that this couldn't be removed from Carthage Jail, that people would scrub and they couldn't get it out. And so you'll see these interesting comments and sermons. Heber C. Kimball gives one. I think it's Heber. I don't think it's Brigham, where he says, we don't want anything more from the Gentiles. Just let them clean up the blood on the floor of Carthage. Wink, wink, they can't do it. which is that reminder, again,
just that little jab. Yeah.
The jab, but is it because they really couldn't clean it up, or is it a symbol of, the tarnish on the Constitution that this act did, right? This,
Right.
but
So more
we have that
metaphorical
idea,
language.
right? But they took it literally. The idea that this is blood that can't be removed. It's stained Illinois in the language of Praise to the Man, in its original version. But also the blood becomes sacred in these coffin canes we talked about before. So Joseph and Hiram's blood have stained the boards that brought them back to Nauvoo, and people wanted. The legend is that the reason they put glass over the blood at Carthage Jail is because people were trying to pick off pieces of it. I've never seen anyone selling a splinter from Carthage Jail, so I don't know if that's a true story or not.
Yeah,
I would pay good
shop.
money. Yeah, I would pay good money for a bloodstained splinter from Carthage Jail if you have one. But they use these boards and they turn them into canes. And so blood-stained boards. And the greatest part about this is they took some of Joseph's hair. If you want to see Joseph's hair, you can see them at the heads of these canes that are still preserved. A piece of glass in some version is taken from a sort of screen they placed over the bodies. And so we have this constructed canes that became very sacred to people and were believed to have healing properties. The rationale is similar to, the Apostle Paul praying over a handkerchief and then sending it out to bless people, which we can read about in Acts. But in this case, you have a cane that Joseph didn't bless, but his literal blood is part of this cane. What a cool thing, right?
Yeah, the coffin canes. I remember listening to that episode that you did, and there were some people that were reporting like their back pain would be alleviated if they had the cane close to them, or they had other there were other things like that of like healing, other memories and stuff like that. What are the most wild or magical or mystical things that you've heard in association to the coffin canes?
Yeah, there's a couple different speculations people have had. The coolest thing is what Heber C. Kimball suggests. I don't know anyone that's actually used it, but he says those that hold the canes can't be conquered by the devil. So it gives you that sort of Captain Moroni strength with these things, or maybe it can ward off the evil spirits. I don't know.
Yeah.
But there's different theories of who got them. Now, the answer is people got them who were at the right space and time to get them, right? And were close to Joseph. Emma gave out the hair from Joseph's head. People went and asked her. And so they made other relics with the hair as well, including a ring that Wilford Woodruff would wear with Joseph's hair in it. But the three theories of who got them, which again are not necessarily factually correct. One is that they were given to those who made a covenant to avenge Joseph's blood. And so it was given a handful of people for that reason. Doesn't seem to be the case. There's a claim that they were given to the heirs of the original leaders of the church. So sometimes even like a secret special quorum that's above everybody else. And so it would hand down. So if you were Heber C. Kimball, you pass your cane to your heirs. And it's not just that they're your son and that's awesome, but they're actually kind of taking over your special position. And then finally, our most recent claim is that there were 12 canes and that these 12 canes are representing the 12 tribes of Israel. And that Emma is the one that made the claim. All three of those are not historically backed up at all. But the idea that people believe they were relics is...
That's wild. So
pretty fun, huh?
If you were a gambling man, would you wager that President Oaks might have one of these canes?
President Oaks has access to two of the canes, but he currently has them in the Church History Museum. But he 100% should feel free to use those canes if he's interested.
That'd be pretty sweet. Yeah.
If he wants to know if we'd be okay with it, we'd be okay with it. That'd be awesome.
100%. 100%.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's really cool. It lets you get in the mind of people back then and see what they think. I think oftentimes, going back to the very beginning of this podcast, oftentimes we think of these people as just this flat two-dimensional kind of caricature of what they were, and just very simplistic in the ways. And they weren't. It was very complicated back in those days, and in terms of incentives and allegiances and beliefs and so forth. So it's just incredible that within that complexity, there was able to be order created, and Brigham Young was created to create and maintain this order and bring out the saints out west. And and really follow Joseph's wishes, because before Joseph died, they were scouting. They were looking for a new place. They went out to Texas. They went out to Oregon. They went out to, I think, California, if I'm not mistaken. And so he was really able to fulfill that wish of Joseph after his death.
And the greatest thing about this is, how could you hate Brigham Young when the only reason we have the endowment today is because of Brigham Young's ministry? That's the thing that gets me more than anything. I know we're all uncomfortable with things he said about race. We all think he was wrong. I think he's wrong. I think he said some things that weren't politically correct and posited some theology that maybe not all of us need to accept. That's not a big deal to me. But he brought us the endowment. I can't imagine having this sort of animosity for a man who gave me what I consider the most meaningful ordinance I've ever participated in, right?
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. Yeah. 100%. We are getting close to time. Are there any other little folklore stories that we want to dive into? Okay.
Can always do more.
For sure. We'll probably get you back on another episode to cover some more. I try and keep it around like 45 minutes to an hour, usually is the typical run time.
That's smart, yeah. You can invite me back anytime.
Awesome. Great. Hey, that's great.
Really fun.
I'm sure the dads will appreciate that. One of the things that we have going right now is a big Discord it's an interfaith Discord, but it's mostly, I'd say probably 85-95% LDS dads, and it's called dadsneedfriends.com. We game, we talk faith, we talk family, fitness, finance, everything in between. And so what we try and do with every episode at the very end is, what is the takeaway in the age of home-centered church for the average dad? What are your thoughts when it comes to like polygamy denial? And maybe if dads are coming across some folklore, or maybe they hear something that doesn't quite sit right with them, what is your takeaway for that dad?
You got to be the center of faith in your home. And so nonsense has been spewed about the church constantly since the beginning. And as a father, what I want to do is be that rock of belief. I want to sustain the prophet. That's a really awesome, based, manly thing to do, sustain the prophet. And and I want to have a good idea about the way I talk about the past. I don't ever want my kids to hear me say things like, gosh, Brigham Young did this, but he sure was a scoundrel. Or Brigham Young is fill in the blank. Gosh, guys, we're human people. And I've made covenants in the temple to consecrate. And as part of that, that means I bear kind of a cross. I bear a burden. It's a lot easier to toss all these guys under the bus. And as dads, I like that. That's specifically what we need to not do.
Sure. I love that. So we'll sustain the prophet, sustain our leaders. I love that idea. Okay, well, we are getting close to the hour, so we'll wrap it up there. So until next time, we've got David at The Sword of Laban. Check him out on YouTube and subscribe. We've got Christopher Blythe. He's primarily on Facebook. Is there a specific page that you're under?
Oh, Christopher James Blythe. You can find me on Facebook, but Angels and Seer Stones, yeah.
Angels and Seer Stones, that's on YouTube, so be sure to check that out and subscribe. You can actually learn more about the Coffin canes there, like I was doing this morning at the gym. And my name is Hayden Holm, and this is Salty Saints. We'll see ya.